know it's the time, but ultimately the intensity goes up. Now, I talked about dynamic correspondence. I won't spend a lot of time on that, but ultimately, folks, when you look, I may have added this slide, I'm sorry. When you look, and this, again, this will be downloadable on Jay's site as soon as I'm done. When you look at this, folks, nothing we do in the weight room has the same speed at which it happens on the, there's nothing on the field of play. Okay, the shot put, running down the field of track, the limbs, how fast are the limbs going when a 100-meter guy's running down the track? It's unbelievable, okay? The shot put at 18 meters per second, or the hammer, I'm sorry. But ultimately, you have to try to get to that point. And basically, I'll show you how I think I do that and the direction we go. Now, if you've read my book, A Little History on the Undulator Model, folks, this is basically training in a nutshell. I mean, I found this in the history of the undulation model. This goes back to horse people in 1950. You all have done this in some capacity. All it is 1 day of training. Day one, you train where you think you should train. Okay, let's say if you're running a 200, you may run 200s, you may run a little less, 150s, you may run a little more, but ultimately you're in that range. The next day you train under distance. You train for speed, so you'll do a short distance training. There's many track models that follow this. Again, I found it in horses, 1950s. They knew. Horses are great. They have no, I'll refer to the term of sociobiology later, but you know, you give a horse a vitamin and it runs faster, there's no placebo effect. It doesn't know what it's getting, okay? So this model worked with horses. It will work with humans too, as long as they're not complete mental midgets. The longer distance, then you have day 3, which is a high capacity work day. So the intensity's not that high, but it's a longer work day. This works with horses, this works with runners. This is the basic undulated model if you look at it. It's not that difficult. Bodybuilding in the gym, keeping your heart rate lower than you normally would, than a max effort set, is a rest rate of, can be an aerobic day, as long as your heart rate can stay in between certain ranges. Now, sets for time. Now, again, I use the undulated model, and actually I shifted it to better work with stress based upon the weekly model of how your body adapts. And really, if you look at like the strength athlete up there at the very top, he walks in day 1, his sets are 5 seconds long. That day, maybe you'd be at 85%. Can you get a double or a triple in there? Probably. People ask me, well, I got a 3-second day. Yeah, my shot putters are moving some heavy weight. We're doing maybe a cluster, 92%, does a single, rest, does a single, rest. How do I do the, let's say, RDLs? 3 seconds. Can I get one in? Well, if you do an undulated RDL, so essentially you just do your RDL position, and at the bottom you undulate. I have athletes that can get 400 pounds for just undulating up and down in the bottom stretch position, 6 reps in 3 seconds. It's a lot of work, okay? And all I'm saying is you have to pick the right exercise. So the only downfall to this program is that you start to push yourself when you get to the extremes is of the limited time, is you're going to limit your type of program that you do, okay? The type, I should say, the amount of exercise you can select. Because doing a, well, as you can see, there's probably no way to do a Turkish get-up in there, okay? I'll just be honest with you. I don't do those, but I've only heard of them, actually. I've never really seen one. But you can understand there's a lot of stress here, and that's my model. I make sure I produce a lot of stress. So then as my athletes go, like my shot putters, only if we're trying to build work capacity will we ever get into maybe the 15, 20 seconds. Most of the time my shot putters stay under the 10-second model, okay? Why? You get over 10 seconds and you start repeating tons and tons of bouts of 10 seconds of strength work. You start to release the negative hormones, obviously cortisol. Bulgarians, that was the butcher, the strength coach from Bulgaria. I butcher his name, so I'm not even going to say it. But ultimately, that's the theory. They kept their reps low so they didn't release cortisol, use a lot of energy, or use a lot of carbohydrates, and then start to run out. So they do a lot of singles and doubles. And they got strong. You can't deny the fact that they got strong. And everybody used drugs, so that's not an excuse, okay? The strength endurance. So now I'll use an example really quick. I think I referenced it later. My sprinters, when they need to get strong, they may do these, let's say swimming. They do the same or they'll do the second group where it's 7 seconds on Monday, Wednesday's 5 seconds, 10 seconds on Friday. They'll do that. They may do the same workout as my mid-distance sprint, who, when they think they need to get sport specific, we might do the endurance strength. But they, honest to God, the kids think they're doing the most sport specific because these kids are doing, the sprinters are doing the shorter distance ones, okay, or the shorter duration. And the mid-distance are doing that. So you may look at my program, and it may be the same program, but the kids actually will think they're doing much different. It's really energy system specific. And ultimately, if you're looking at this chart, you can judge. Now, 45 seconds is about as high as I will go. That's for endurance runners. You can say marathoners or whatever it may be. But any athlete can work in any of these ranges based upon what you want to do. My undulated model for heavy, just so you can understand, just if people haven't seen it, it's about 82 to 87, 90 to 97, and 75. Then the high speeds are 65 to 70, and then I peak about 80 now, and then 55 to 62, somewhere in there. I mean, those can fluctuate. I'll go back to this one. Many people peak basically in this model. Because why? Powerlifters, weightlifters peak at high loads or heavy loads. The flaw with this is, again, look, that's for weightlifting. That's moving a bar slow. Even, I know, Olympic lifting coach will go crazy, but the snatch is still slow on a relative scale of human performance. Compared to a runner, his limb, the speed at which he comes down the track running, okay, or a shot putter throwing the shot put. The snatch is still a slow movement, so is the power clean. So everyone got their peaking models of peaking at 90%. Well, about 10 years ago, I peaked my athletes. I went to this model at 80%, and I got better results for high speed because we're getting closer to what they do in sports. Well, it took, I'm not the smartest guy. It took me another 8 years to figure out that maybe, what if I peaked at 80 to 85, I got results. Should I peak at 50 to 25%? So that's what I did to create my high-speed method. But ultimately, you have to keep in mind that high-speed method is teaching muscle function, and I'll get into that. Now, here's another chart. Like I said, we'll get this up. My shot putters, these are my basic guidelines of where the most specific spot athletes should be, okay, based upon what they do when it's sport specificity. Not that an 800-meter runner can't, especially at the beginning of a training cycle or during a strength cycle, can't be in the speed strength where it's 7, 5, 10. Any of these can fluctuate, but like I said, ultimately, this is where the most specific parts of your athlete or time should be spent when you're peaking them. And based upon your training models, you may actually slide that different ways because if they're doing a lot of volume, let's say your 800-meter runners are doing a lot of volume, you can actually drop that to 25, 17, and 32. So this can be used. You can manipulate where you want to be on your intensity and duration. So then, ideally, you control the whole training organism. Now, I'll go over this. I covered this last year a little bit. I'm going to do an abbreviated version. The antagonistic facilitated specialized method. What is it? Basically, it's based upon the principles of I'm teaching the muscle to shut off and turn on at a high rate of speed. Basically, it was reading Super Training. Yosef has it back there, too. I'm sure everyone has a copy. Medvedev, his concept, when he researched, found that the most elite humans relax their muscles 200% faster than a novice. That was the biggest difference. It wasn't the speed at which they contracted. It was the speed at which they relaxed. Now, you know, and Dr. Now, I thought of this method, but Dr. Yes has helped me in conversation, talking to him about some different things. It was wrote in the Soviet Sports Review. If you have that, you're very fortunate. But even the lower level world-class athletes were 50% slower in relaxation than of the masters of sports. And here's where you can see it. The contraction speed isn't that significant of a difference, but it's the relaxation speed. So then the first thing I asked myself was, how can I train it? And so basically, you know, and here's the funny thing. You go over to the physiology people will say, physiology people will tell you, yeah, you know, the only way to do that is, you know, increase the mitochondria and the sarcoplasmic reticulum that sucks back up the calcium. But then you go over to the motor development people, and they'll say, no, it's not just that. It's the with the muscle spindle and the one muscle contracting and the other muscle shutting off. You can increase the myelination through repetition, and obviously, and then the neuroscientists will tell you something else. So, you know what? When you look at all this, you have to look at it from a multidiscipline approach, because so many people, right now, people are looking very narrow-minded in such specific stuff. I use the analogy, there was a TED Talk done where one of the scientists had a problem. He thought a math problem would probably take 3 to 5 or 6 months, I believe it was. And he posted it out there on the internet, and people started answering the different sections, and he got it done in 2 weeks. So, and the complaint or his idea was that if you're publicly funded by government money in your research, you should post it out there, because we could solve a lot of problems using molecular biology and physiology and anatomy, all these fields put together to answer all these questions. It's just a little rant I went on, but ultimately, we could solve a lot of these problems. Now, I'm fortunate. Now, my assistants went through the neural development or the neurosciences, and there's all these professors. I don't even know their names. I don't even know they speak English. But then there was one guy in there that had his picture with a Minnesota basketball shirt on. That's the guy we're going to talk about. Okay, so if you're at the public institutions, or just, you got to find the right guy, and we're going to go meet with him so he can explain some of this neuroscience to us and what we actually his research is some pretty amazing stuff. They're very bright people. But ultimately then, so I'll give you a brief rundown. I took 6 athletes, and again, I mentioned this in my book in great detail. 6 athletes trained at submaximal high velocity. Basically, I trained between 25 and 50%. They were already strong. The coaches were like, they were with me 4 and 5 years. We didn't need to make them any stronger. I had a 180-pound walk-on goalie who could bench 285, 300. Well, all we did for 12 weeks was work between 50 and 25%. Now, you say, that's not a lot of load. Well, but if you take a 150-pound bench press and you pull it down to your chest and then reverse it, if you look at the forces, you're looking at 600 or maybe even 700 pounds at a high speed, high velocity. Exactly what happens at the speed at which sports takes place with the stretch reflex. It's not that hard, okay? So, and they, to my astonishment, they all got stronger and faster. Even though, and now their strength levels were there. Now, if you're weak as a kitten, it's not going to work, folks. You have to be able to be strong, and basically my triphasic, not my triphasic, but the three motions, eccentrically, isometrically, and concentrically. Now, all we're doing with this is utilizing the stretch reflex. Why? Using much higher levels of stored eccentric energy, as Natalia talked. You have to be able to store that energy. Now, what is that? It's a motor skill, folks. Everything in sports is a motor skill that we want. Okay? If the motor skill doesn't work correctly, you're wasting your time. I believe, I wish I could find it, but it was a study in around 1970. I'm not sure who did it, but it was just essentially evaluation of world-class 500-meter runners and the people that didn't make it. They couldn't find any difference in performance from strength, speed qualities, anything. VO2 max, there was no difference between the elite and the sub-level elite, except for the fact that at 3,000 meters, the hip started to undulate. What happens? When the foot strikes the ground, if your hip undulates, you lose free energy stored in the tendons. So then at 3,000 meters of the sub-level people that weren't the highest level, they had to use more metabolic work to propel themselves forward. The elite level, what'd you do?